Hi, yeah, I'm Adrian King. I'm CTO and founder at Elements.cloud. We're actually also a sponsor here. If you get a chance, go and see our stand. However, this talk is actually not about what we do. It's actually about the new Salesforce. I say new, it's been now out in market some time, but the Salesforce DevOps product. I want to give a bit of context why actually I think this is actually a really important offering that Salesforce has brought to market. Now, in terms of my background, I started as a Salesforce admin in 2001. It was a slightly different product in 2001 to the 2023 version of Salesforce. But I've watched the evolution of Salesforce from in 2001 when we actually replaced, for those of you who are old enough, we actually replaced ACT, which is basically our contact management system, by deciding we actually wanted to manage our accounts and contacts in the cloud at the time. And seeing the platform evolve today to be the most comprehensive platform, I believe, in the world for delivering genuinely enterprise-class solutions. But during that evolution, we started taking it out of the box. Then we started building a few validation rules, and as capability came along, we then started to get, I can't even remember when it was, probably about 2006. Somebody else out there can correct me, when sort of sandboxes first arrived, and the statement. God, I can't even. My mind's gone completely blank. What does this replace? Change sets. I've been thinking about something else this morning. Change sets. They're so appalling, actually, that I try and blank them from my head. But we started using change sets in about 2006, and went through to the company which I was using at there quite a lot to sort of 2011 as the product got more and more sophisticated. And even then, I hated change sets. The really challenging part is that change sets really haven't evolved at all for about 15 years. They handle more metadata types because they're more metadata types, but the general mechanics of moving metadata from one environment to another environment that Salesforce has provided as the default, I'm going to call it admin friendly. The word friendly is in dispute there. But admin capable, point and click, really hasn't evolved at all. Yet the complexity of the environments and what people have been trying to do has radically shifted since 2006. As today, Elements, we use Salesforce extensively. I luckily have an admin team who does the work. I don't have to get involved with it day to day now myself, particularly other than signing off changes. Until quite recently, we were still using change sets, and it was really interesting. Because of that, there was a real behavior to try and not use multi-stage pipelines or sandboxes because of the overhead of, so it was actually compromising the right way of doing stuff. Now, there are some very, very good products out there, Flowsome being one of them, Copado, GearSet, many of them are here today as sponsors, who provide the capability to actually support the development lifecycle. But there's a significant investment both in the technology and in implementing that level of technology. And I think there are 70 or 80,000 Salesforce organizations using Salesforce orgs as of 6 months ago who were using change sets as part of their development environment. So there are a very, very large constituent who are actually on 15-year-old technology trying to address issues that just require something dramatically different. So that's the sort of the backdrop to it. So basically, what is DevOps Center? Some of you may know of Karen Fidlak. Karen Fidlak is the DevOps Center product manager, and this is basically her statement. It's about trying to introduce best practices, DevOps best practices to the entire community, not just to the top end or who are consciously willing to invest in a DevOps platform. And also whether you're on the low code, pro code spectrum, mix of both, being able to support that. So that's basically been Karen's mission, her vision for the last few years, actually. I mean, this project is something that Salesforce have been working on now for about 3.5, 4 years. And it's now in GA. We've actually moved away from using change sets to using DevOps Center ourselves. So at the same time, we were actually the launch partner when they launched the beta. Elements has got an integration with DevOps Center, so we've been quite involved from early stage of the pilots of building integration. There are now quite a number of products out there that have got integrations. I think on the testing side, Probar, I think you've got integration with it, and actually quite a lot of the tooling vendors, because it is actually an important part of the tooling landscape now. So let's talk a little bit about that's the vision. In the end, there are a whole bunch of features associated with DevOps Center. I'm not going to concentrate a large amount about the specific features, because I think this is more about what we have learned through the process of trying to transition, learning before and transitioning to using DevOps Center. So these are sort of and this is actually a Salesforce slide, by the way. So this is what they are trying to do. It's modern UI built into Salesforce. I'm going to talk. This is genuinely a user community rather than a Salesforce pitch. Salesforce are changing the UI because, to be blunt, they got it wrong first time. They actually built bespoke Lightning web components when actually just using Lightning would have made a massive difference. But all said and done, it's part of the platform. It is actually quite usable. It does do what it says on the tin. So the modern UI, it allows you to view, manage, and track changes as the development happens. The entire principle was using version control systems to underpin. So moving from the org as the repository of knowledge to actually moving to the source code repository as being the knowledge. Being able to move change across environments with clicks, very, very simple visibility of what you're doing with clicks, and trying to actually make sure that you can work in hybrid teams, whether or not you're using the UI, the CLI, different version control systems, and being able to merge, deploy. All of the things which normal code management deals with. For those of you who come from a coding background, I've used source code management systems for the best part of 30 years. Actually, managing code is relatively easy. Managing the complexity of the Salesforce metadata structures and moving them from one environment to another is actually incredibly hard, particularly given that some of the metadata components and their definitions are very, very, very complex, and multiple changes need to affect those. Just thinking about profiles, for example, is a really, really tough one, because virtually any change to any field affects a profile. When you're working on multiple changes at the same time, you are touching the profile metadata of multiple teams. It is a real challenge to control. So that was basically the set of goals that the team had. Now, if you're going to put something like DevOps Center and you've today been just using change sets, it's a massive opportunity to change the way you operate. You could take, though I don't think it's not completely true. You can't just go, I'm going to use DevOps Center instead of change sets and work the way we work today. If you try and do that, actually it's really painful. What you've actually got to do is take a step back and think, how do we actually work? What is our software development lifecycle? Because you're talking about changing the tooling to support a process by putting different tooling in with different capability. So the critical thing that the learning we got took, and we come from thinking about change, is there's an enormous opportunity to do stuff better. But you've consciously got to decide to go and do it if you actually want to make the most of this. And if you're actually doing that, there is an opportunity to look at your entire tooling stack as well at this point in time. Because if you think about your software development lifecycle, it starts from doing the analysis, which is where we, Elements Cloud, play. It goes through to the tools you use for development. It looks at how you actually test. I know Richard, who's somebody we've worked with a lot from Provar, has got a session later today, haven't you, Richard, talking about, and they've got an integration with DevOps Center. It's how you actually think about redesigning your life cycle to actually deliver the right things faster. So let's talk about how you supercharge using Salesforce DevOps Center. If you think about this life cycle, which Salesforce built, effectively, you've got plan. Now, I have a massive issue, which is because I'm an analyst by background, developer, but really I've been a business analyst most of my career, is that plan does not do that justice, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But starting through from code, there is an enormous opportunity for us to now go and look at how do you actually drive this cycle to ensure that what actually gets to be released, and there is a missing chunk here as well, which I believe is about operate. How do you actually operate it such that you understand that what you have delivered is actually working for the business? So there is actually understanding and consciously thinking about this cycle is fundamental to getting the best out of doing a tooling swap, because it is a tooling swap. If you go from change sets to DevOps Center, you are swapping tooling, and it does different things. So, it is our mantra for our business, but I'm a massive fan of thinking about you need to build the right thing, and then you need to build it right. So there is an opportunity to actually think about, during the planning phase, how you build the right thing. Because what you actually put into that boundary there is a set of changes which you want to deliver. And traditionally those are work items, or in most cases we talk about them as user stories. There is a set of changes. As a financial analyst, I want to do X so that I can do Y. If you don't put good stories in, it doesn't matter how well you execute that, you're not actually going to deliver what the business needs. So when you're thinking about this change of DevOps Center or any tooling around improving this part of the cycle, you need to make sure you think about, am I building the right thing? And how do I tell the community now, the developers, the testers, the release managers, what it is that we should be building? And you can tell I'm pretty passionate about this, but I've worked in the last 38 years in enough projects where, in 1988, I actually was responsible for throwing away £7 million worth of software, because as we got into this bit here, we realised we hadn't done that bit right. That was a pretty painful experience actually for the business, when you realise quite a bit more work here wouldn't have resulted in a 3-year delay and throwing away £7 million worth of software. So understanding how to build good user stories, which is the output from really understanding what the business needs, is absolutely fundamental. And the reason I'm going on this is, as soon as you start to think about changing the tooling, go take a step up and think about what you are doing. Because if you actually do this correctly, the guys can actually build the right thing. You've actually got the ability to make sure when you test, you're actually testing to deliver what is the right thing. When you actually go through, it's interesting, user acceptance testing, I think that there is another test after this which is called business acceptance testing, it's a term which actually one of our clients 15 years ago came up with. He said, you know what, we released something, it was a disaster, passed every single user acceptance test, but the business didn't work. We had actually broken the business despite the fact all the systems worked. So if you don't do this bit, all the rest of this can be really quite moot. Okay, once you've actually built the right thing, you then need to make sure you build the thing right. And that's when the tooling here and here and here and here all comes into play. We've been focusing very much on the coding, but actually this is actually all round here of how do you make sure you build the thing right. And this is where DevOps Center starts to really come into play. And it's not just DevOps Center, it's actually all the tools in this category at the moment. I'm focused on DevOps Center because I think it's a major play by Salesforce. And I'm also going to be, I don't think actually that DevOps Center is a particular threat to the major, the gear sets, the Flowsims, the Capados of this world at this point, because they're actually addressing a different audience. The enterprise players, the capabilities in the paid-for products far outweigh those currently in DevOps Center. But if you're actually in the mid-market space, I think DevOps Center is well worth looking at, and Salesforce will only improve its capabilities over time. So the opportunity here is then to go and sort out actually how do we code. We've always tried internally to be very focused on risk management. You know, when you're actually building stuff, some stuff is very low risk, some stuff is really high risk. If you don't plan properly, it's actually very hard to determine what that risk is. But when you do know what the risk is, you can actually funnel things through completely different pipelines. To high risk requires a very, very different approach to a low risk. Interestingly, we do more in production than we used to, because we are willing to make changes straight into production if it is a low risk change, because we're willing to do that. And people go, you do stuff directly into production? And the response is, there is some stuff which it is perfectly viable to do straight into production. But we now know what it is. There are some changes which we put through a multi-stage pipeline, because the ability with complex integrations to our accounting system and to HubSpot and Gainsight and things like that, where if we don't test it properly and the ability to break our business, it would just be a disaster. So actually we have, because of this capability we've now got to actually move stuff properly and under control between different environments, we have re-engineered our entire way we actually do the code and release management at the moment. So, I mean, I've really hammering the point, but DevOps Center is just a tool. What the tool allows you to do is go and re-engineer your process, your lifecycle process. And if you don't do that, you are missing a massive opportunity to dramatically improve the way you deliver stuff. And we have personally seen, by putting DevOps Center in, a very, very significant improvement in our life cycle. The quality of stuff that's going through, the control that we've got, the visibility that we've got. I spend, as CTO and COO elements and I spend a lot of my time trying to go, how do we improve not just the quality, but the time to value? One of the things which, there's a massive difference between time to delivery and time to value. If you just put DevOps Center in and you can do stuff faster, you can actually end up in the wrong place even faster. It's really, if you build the wrong stuff, I just deliver the wrong stuff to you quicker. That is of no value to the business at all, actually. It's actually about time to value. It's about delivering the right stuff, and at not just the right stuff, but at an appropriate cost. I want to basically shift, finding something in production is really, really, really expensive. Not just because actually it takes time to go and fix that, but the opportunity cost or the cost of the failure can be incredibly high. The whole shift left paradigm, I think, has been, a lot of it's focused on testing earlier. I'd actually go, if you can actually fix it by not specifying it or specifying it correctly, that's the right place to get it right. Actually, finding the problem when you're building it is better than finding it in test, which is better than finding it when you've deployed it, and definitely better than finding it in production. So be very careful that you don't just supercharge a bad process. Make sure actually that you are running a good process, and then think about making sure you have the right tooling suite to support that process. And I think I would suggest that go back and think about the process and then how to use. There is no one tool which supports the whole life cycle, guys. You are going to have to put a range of tools in across the life cycle. That's tools to do the business analysis, to do the story development, to do the impact assessment on change, to actually do the code analysis, to actually do the testing, to do the deployment management. But then there's actually tools out there to determine how well is the system running. And I'm not talking at a technical level, I'm talking about how well has something been adopted. It's something which we've been bringing to market is, in production, how well did you actually go and specify this? Being able to actually understand that we thought that this new capability we're going to put in was going to be used by 100 of our sales reps, And we probably expect them to go in and look at an object 5 times a day on average to discover that this object has actually been viewed 14 times in the last week. Clearly something's gone badly wrong somewhere in the process. And by the way, we have discovered this in our own work that we have done, which is we've built stuff expecting people to use it and they don't use it. Something, massive cost in terms of this process, no value to the business actually. Something went wrong. Something went wrong actually up here, which is we built something the business didn't, either the business didn't really need it in the first place or the way we delivered it to the business wasn't fit for purpose. Works brilliantly, but it doesn't actually deliver value if nobody's using it in the business. So it's how do you re-engineer your process to use DevOps Center? Now, I'm going to dive a bit more into what DevOps Center is here in terms of the process. So, DevOps Center hinges around the concept of, you can tell these slides because this is actually still got the beta on there, but I really should update these slides with the production versions. DevOps Center is the idea that you can actually define a pipeline of stages. Now that stage might be dev through to production. It could be, so you work in a sandbox, and when I've done sandbox, it could be in this case that actually we've actually got 4 stages before we've actually got the dev environment. So you're going dev, pushing into the approved work items we're going to test, into user acceptance testing, into staging, and finally to production. That's quite a complex pipeline. DevOps Center, you can define multiple pipelines. You can actually define, so you might have your high-risk pipeline goes through this. Your low-risk pipeline is a dev sandbox straight into production. Again, it comes back to you need to design how you're going to work, not just put it in and go, well, I wonder, yeah, I'll create a pipeline like this. Design it, guys. Think about it. There is enormous value in actually designing your software development lifecycle properly and working out how you're going to use it. You'll see that each of these are work items. So a work item is, they don't call it a story, it's more generic, and I think they've done the right thing here. There is a work item. The reason is that actually a single story might result in multiple work items. And we see that. We have a story, we generate a work item from that story, and then if there's a defect, we create another work item to resolve that story. So actually you end up with multiple work items delivering that particular story. The other things, I can't remember if I just check on the, no, I'm going to have, in the pipeline here, what you can also start to do is at a particular stage, you can sort of this promote as a work item bundle. You can then go, these work items now need to be grouped together. So if you're thinking about how traditionally you've done releases with change sets, you're trying to work out every single piece of metadata which has been involved in what you need to release. And for a quite complex release, that might be hundreds of metadata items. We've had change sets which are enormous sometimes if there's a big piece of work which we want to take into production, which itself might be 20, 25 stories. Each of those stories has got a set of changes associated with it. At a certain point here, you can actually go, I'm managing each individual work item I'm pushing through, but at some point you can go, when this arrives here, group them together, and everything has to go as one complete set. And that's actually incredibly useful. It means that you can start to actually, at staging, all the changes on staging get grouped together before they can be pushed through. I've also got to come back to, only works if you think about it and design it. So, work items. Work item is literally just it's a Salesforce record. By the way, I should say that DevOps Center is a Salesforce package. It's written on the platform. It's actually a managed package that it's a managed package which you can install under the hood rather than having to go through and install it through App Exchange. But it's so basically you've got work items, you know, HR recruitment, HR onboarding, whatever it might be. You can assign them to people, they have a status, and very importantly, which development environment is this on? Work items are incredibly simple. They are not designed to, they are designed to be a very simple ticket to know where stuff is going through. I think quite rightly they very consciously decided to not make this a ticketing management system. This is a deployment management system, and actually the definition of the story, the definition of a piece of work needs to be managed somewhere else, and then this gets linked through to it. So that might be in Jira, might be in Azure DevOps, it might be in our system, but this is a placeholder with a very simple description. If you actually want to view this as your ticketing system, it is not a ticketing system. It is a deployment management system where there is a piece of work with associated metadata with it. So when I create a new work item, one of the first things I have to do is select which development sandbox this work item is going to be associated with. So you can, I mean, Dev 1, Dev 2 was pretty unimaginative in this case, but it does tell you there are, the important thing is that actually these need to be dev sandboxes or scratch orgs. So you can actually do these from scratch orgs through. But the point is, when you specify this, when it's in progress, as you are working on that org, you can pull, basically you can go and pull through from the development environment all the changes to metadata that have occurred since you last pulled. And for those of you who've used change sets, the nightmare is knowing what's changed and keeping track of that, etc. You don't have to worry about that any longer. It will tell you what's been changed. You don't have to commit all of it if you don't want to, because clearly there's stuff which has been changed which you don't want to pull through. But at least you know what is there. And from a productivity enhancement, that's probably the thing that because we as a shop are a low-code shop. We do some Apex development, but very little. We do everything so I've got admins who are low-code admins. They don't come, interestingly, from a development background. The hunting around, the ability for them to just go, tell me what's there, what I've changed, those are the things which from this work item I'm now going to push through from this development environment, has been actually quite transformational for them. They have actually discovered that they now don't mind working in sandboxes because it's easy to push things through. And they've also discovered that they don't mind now working in a pipeline as much, because previously with change sets, if you went from one sandbox into another sandbox into another sandbox, you had to define the change set again. And that is a really tedious thing to do for those of you who, I'm sure I've got nodding heads out there, but that's really painful. It has actually transformed productivity, which means that they are actually willing to use the process rather than trying to circumvent it. There were a couple of problems in the early days. It was really struggling with profiles, but they seem to have fixed that now. So, implementation considerations. This is all about change. This is an opportunity to re-engineer DevOps, and there are actually a whole bunch of, when we were the launch partner at, I think it was TDX last year. Memory's fading a bit. There were a limited number of partners. We were the first partner that launched with Karen and her team. But there are actually now really good integrations with a whole bunch of tools out there that allow you to build an integrated life cycle now from the analysis side, people like ourselves, through into DevOps Center, through to the testing tools, through to the backup and restore tools, to manage and support going through the life cycle. And a lot of them, so example, we actually have got an extension to our product which allows you to, when you're on the work item, see the full story details. Because we can, from our product, and they say there are other products that can do this, it's not a pitch particularly for the Elements.Crowd product, but if you define the stories in our product, you can either push them to Jira. Actually, they don't have an integration with Jira yet, but they do plan to be building an integration to Jira. But you can create the work item directly from Elements. It links them. It means that actually in the work item, we've got an extension where in the right panel, all the details of the story come up. associated. So you can, even though the work item is very simple with a description, now you've got all the impact analysis and everything that we provide as analysis tooling, and that planning, that analysis phase is now available to the developers and release managers if they're using this as the platform to drive their work. So I think there are some really, really good, it's becoming a much richer environment to actually run the life cycle well. And whether you like it or not, moving metadata from sandboxes, you've got to do it. You either develop in production, or if you are going to actually do things properly and actually use sandboxes or scratch orgs and build a pipeline, you have got to move metadata. You've got no option. Therefore, you've got to use you've got to have tooling to support you to do that. Long gone, as far as I'm concerned, of sort of the ant days of doing it by script, etc. There is the opportunity here to re-engineer and use the tools to really help that process out there. Call to action. I'm hoping the presentation, you get access to presentations, but there's a DevOps Trailblazer community out there. It's actually a good community, QR code. There's actually an implementation guide that we wrote with the DevOps team to just give some more focus on how best to go and implement DevOps Center. And actually get the value of this transformation right at the moment. I set myself to give myself some time for questions. So any questions? Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So you say that you're using DevOps Center internally.
Yeah.
Is that just for your kind of business operations, or obviously you're also on the Apple Exchange? Exchange packages are distributed as managed packages, etc. There's a different build process.
Yeah. We're using it purely at the moment for our internal business operations. Yeah. Yeah. No, the construction of our package. No, that's a different process. Yeah. Hi.
How would you go back to the planning phase?
Yeah.
If a feature from your user story proves to be not valuable anymore. Yeah. While developing. Yeah. How big do you go back to the planning phase, or?
I could speak for the rest of the day on this. If you actually look at our own story list, we regularly have not implemented, for exactly the reason as we go through, it's very iterative. If you actually get the tools linked together, if you can actually see the business, the end. So we have a very, very defined planning methodology because it's what we do. But, so we have a very well-defined end-to-end process that is mandatory for a change. So we understand what the to-be process is. We understand the data model. We generate the stories from that process. If we discover there's a story which we now don't think is relevant, we go back and understand why. Do we need to go and create a different story? Actually, there was a change we did a few weeks ago where one of the stories decided we really didn't need, because actually, as people started in tests to go and say, we actually don't need this capability because the account managers really wanted a PDF generated of something because that was how they'd worked in the past. When we actually showed them, we had a story to generate decent dashboards, and when we showed them the dashboards, they went, yeah, we don't need the PDF, so we just scrubbed that story. The interesting one is we hadn't actually developed it either, we just hadn't told them because we were pretty certain they didn't need it. But that was an interesting one where we are constantly evaluating, is this still needed to actually deliver? We're constantly talking to the users about it. So even though I've described what can feel quite waterfall-like in some ways, you need to plan, it is still very agile. But we're trying to make the agility not at just the code level, we're trying to make the agility at the problem level, what we're trying to solve. And we talk about doing agile business analysis to make sure that we are very agile and make sure we're building the right thing. And as you're going through the development phase, regularly we discover that actually we don't need to build this. We found that we rarely now have missed something. Is actually because I insist that we don't spend the money building stuff until we know it's the right thing to build. And the interesting thing is actually the back of the room is my CRO, Richard, and quite a lot of requests for changes come through his team and from Richard. There are times when we will do the analysis and we go back and go, we now know how much this is going to cost to build. Is it worth it? And at the planning stage, we decide it's not actually worth going and doing a development because there isn't a return on investment really, and something's got a higher priority. And to me, that's a real win. We may have done the work to go and understand the problem, but we actually haven't committed where most expenses to the build phase. So at any point in time, I think it's completely legitimate to say I'm not going to do something. Sorry, long answer to a question, but I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Change sets are really annoying to work with, but I thought one of the positives of them was you had to know, and you started to learn exactly what bits of metadata you'd changed and exactly what you needed to deploy to execute whatever your user story was. Okay,
well, I completely agree on that slide where you can go, oh, what have I changed? I'd argue that actually when you're designing the stories, you should be working out what metadata even before you code. And if you're interested, go upstairs and see what we do, because I think I completely agree. Understanding what you're going to change. And, you know, one of the things which I haven't touched on here is, as all of these tools do, is clearly you can get conflict. You know, two developers, and you discover when you do the commits, and Git will tell you that, or GitHub will tell you that, you know, you've got a problem. I actually want to know that far earlier than the commit phase. If you know what you're going to change, even at the design phase, where you think you can determine the conflicts at that point in time. So yes, I would agree there was a discipline which came with change sets, but that discipline I think you can re-engineer into different tooling much earlier. You know that shift left slide? I'm actually going to go back to it because I'm pretty passionate about this slide. I actually want to know where the conflicts are here, not here or here. And that comes from knowing what metadata you are changing.
And are you finding there's a challenge in people sort of maybe accidentally sort of committing half of another user story from they're looking at the changes, or are you doing one sandbox per user story?
We're doing one sandbox per business change, which may be multiple stories. So we don't do sandboxes by developer, we do sandbox by so we don't use scratch orgs at the moment. We still use, but we actually use our we use our sandboxes quite like scratch orgs, and they're very ephemeral. So we use the sandbox for the epic, in effect, but we call it a business value increment because I think epic is too it's too strongly tied to the developer world thinking. We talk about there's a business value increment. There's an increment of value to the business of what we're doing. We create a sandbox to deliver that in. That might have one story, it might have 25 stories. We may well phase those stories. So actually we might have 3 releases, but we'll use one sandbox for that. There are refresh issues with that. We will sometimes refresh a sandbox during the process. We do think about it a lot, but yeah, I mean the understanding the change that every user story has is really important. We insist before we go from there to there, that boundary really, which is the handover of a story from understanding it to development, the metadata, you should know every bit of metadata which you're going to change. Now the reality is you don't. You know, I talked about the fact that my background is as an analyst. You know, I started as a programmer in the mid-80s, but very quickly became a business systems analyst. I have this. And I worked on some really, really complex defense-type projects where you didn't get it wrong. As a Navy commander once said, blue screen of death means death. It was quite eye-opening, that comment. But you need to do the appropriate amount of analysis, and I have what I call the jelly mold thing, which is you need to do enough work here, but if you'd made a jelly and you turned it upside down, it's set well enough, it doesn't run on the floor, but it also needs to, when you prod it, to wobble, in that you never, at this point, fully understand the problem, but you've got to understand the shape of it. And at that point, with a shape, you should also understand what you're going to change in the org, such that before you put in, and you can actually determine that this field, those guys are trying to add a pick list value, and those guys are going to add a pick list value to the same field. That has happened to us, and Okay, let's schedule that. Let's work out the implications of that before we discover that down here when we stamp on each other. So again, another long answer to a question, but I hope helpful.
We've got this package installed, but the team's not really adopting it.
Yep.
What barriers have you seen, and how do you overcome those barriers so that teams can drive and adopt it?
I'm going to actually come back to my core message I put, which is you've actually got to go back and redesign the life cycle, and people understand the life cycle, and make sure that the tools that you're putting in support that life cycle well. And then you've got to drive people to use the new SDLC supported by the tool. If you just say use the new tool, people will just go back to working the way they used to work. I think that's which is why I'm so. It's a change opportunity, but you also won't get people using new tooling if they just are going to work the way they worked before. The only thing you might get is they'll use a small part which basically supports the previous life cycle, and you get no value from the tooling swap. You've got to go, the only reason you're using the new tooling is to work a different way. So I would go back, you've got to take a long, hard look at how you want to work, get the team on board with how the process now works, and by the way, the tooling supports this. If you can't get that, it's going to be very hard to get them to use a new product, is my belief, a new tooling in the life cycle. Any other questions? I know I stand between you and lunch, and I'm actually 22 seconds run over. Sorry, my...
Just one point, the QR code that was on the screen, fortunately I was told goes to 404.
Oh, okay. Sorry about it, guys.
I just sent you on Slack. If you open
Yeah.
the Slack thing, stick that on the screen.
Yep. I'll do that right now.
But it's actually just download the DevOps Center implementation guide.
So that's the QR code there. Sorry guys, I didn't realise that. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody.
Flowsum is an all-in-one DevSecOps security automation and data management solution for Salesforce that will help you regain full control of your Salesforce instance. With Flowsum, secure and accelerate your entire development lifecycle. Keep control of your data with data backup, recovery, archival, seeding, and more. And maintain cybersecurity posture while bringing governance to your platforms with an adaptive framework. Check out Flowsum on the Salesforce App Exchange to learn more, or visit flowsum.com.